I wanted to show a couple of tricks today on debugging scheduled flows and running some tests with a scheduled flow. Now, we all know Salesforce as of spring 2023 has not given us a means to test a scheduled flow, or we can't debug by passing in specific records. So there are some ways around that I found to help us do that a little bit better. So let's keep going. This is a simple, looks relatively simple scheduled flow. It basically runs and it updates some contact statuses to archive when a contact hits certain criteria. Looks simple enough, but I want to point out a couple of things. First of all, this scheduled flow, you can click on it, does not choose an object, and it just runs every day at 12:30 in the morning. So this is like a catch-all flow that when the contact hits status for archive, it gets archived. Okay, that was the requirements from the customer. However, the contacts to update field, I didn't, instead of putting this all in the criteria, such as run this only on records that meet that criteria, I put it in here under contacts to update. Because I feel that was giving me a little easier way to change this, but it also allowed me to do some other things that we're going to get into in a minute. Now, while this looks simple, you look at my logic here, 1 and 2 and 3, or 4 and 7, and this is not the most difficult one I've ever done, and I know probably a lot of you out there have done complex logic. In fact, I could have probably written this into a formula, maybe even more smoothly, and I believe they're going to have a couple more things to go with it. This is what I got from the customer, that's the logic, and one thing we haven't accounted for in here is null. What if the last marketing activity date and sales activity date is null? Those are things that we haven't even accounted for in here that I'm going to have to, and I may end up rewriting this into a formula. So I think you can see where I'm going with this. How do you test it? So in a scheduled flow, you're done. You're no way really to test it. There's no test way to write a test. There's no debug. The debug, you can't send a specific record in with a debug. Those are all problems. So I just wanted to share a way that I have kind of overcome this a little bit. And what I did is I wrote a new flow. And I've already debugged this a little, as you can see previously. So let's go in. I wrote a new flow. And what I did is I wrote 3 variables in this flow. I wrote variable debug contact ID, variable debug results, and variable debug, which is Boolean. So the variable debug, and here's an interesting part. You go in and I've set it for available for input, hoping someday maybe Salesforce will let me pass inputs into a schedule triggered formulas for debugging. They don't. You hit debug and you get absolutely nothing for an input. So that's okay. So when I'm debugging this flow, I set the value at true for debug. And we're going to debug based on a specific contact ID that meets the criteria. So the variable debugging, I take the 18-digit Salesforce ID and I turn it into a default value. So works pretty decent, you say, overall. Well, we got that criteria, so what's an easy way to work with this? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I want to show you a couple tricks that I picked up. This is used based on these fields here. These are all the fields necessary for this criteria. So normally some of these are hidden, like last HS. HS means HubSpot. This client I have uses HubSpot, and we pass a marketing activity date back into Salesforce. So by doing that, that field is generally hidden. It's used in reporting, it's used in other things, but it really doesn't need to be on page layouts. So I can put it on my administrator page layout, and my standard practice is that I put all fields on the administrator one. But even then, they're all in an odd spot. So what I did is I used the new Lightning component, dynamic forms, sorry. And I'll just show you how I set that up real quick. As you go in to edit your page layout, and thankfully we have this on quite a few standard objects now, and it's really helpful. But what I did is I made a test for archive logic component here where I just went to the fields and I just dropped fields in as I needed them. And I put them in, and I actually did build a filter based on this the user last name has to equal my last name. Why? Well, I'm in a sandbox. I don't plan to port this Lightning page over to production, but just in case, we all know how that goes. I hit the button and port it by mistake. It won't be visible to anyone in production other than me, so they're not saying, what is that thing I'm seeing on my... You won't see anything. So that's how we did that. Whoops, I saved without required fields. Yep, that's fine in this case. And let's just back out of there. So to test my flow, I'm going to really quite simply, as soon as it refills here, go in. Now our criteria was that the last marketing activity date has to be greater than 24 months ago. So what I'm going to do real simple is I'm just going to go up here and I'm going to set that to 2020. These fields are all set by, if I hit the right button. There we go. And now I have to pick a date. Sorry. So we'll do this, and this should now set to be an archived record according to that. So we save the record, and let's go over to our debugged flow, and let's just debug it. And I'll go over the exact flow functions here in a second. The flow has unsaved changes. Well, let's save them. I don't know what those unsaved changes are, but let's save it anyways. And then I will hit debug. Now, you get debug, pause, and run and rollback. We're not updating any records with this, but I always say hit run and rollback just to be safe. And let her go. Let's see what we got. Okay, we see the path it followed. And I actually, in my debugging, made an assignment value found, contact found with filter criteria. That means the complex logic under context to update was found. Now let me display these two side by side. Let me just show you these two side by side here. I can pull it out of there, and let's just let's reduce it down a little. Of course, that's going to make that absolutely invisible now, but I can do it that way. This is the simple flow, and all I did was add decision element. Is the debug variable true? Yes. If so, it goes in, and I can actually eliminate getting the contact record because that wasn't even necessary anymore. So starting here, basically, if we run down through this path, it goes to the context update, which you also saw in this other flow. That's the same exact element. And these other two are down below. And this is a neat little action. It's a set customer status to archive. It's a map collection action that just basically sets the customer status to archive of any found contacts. Very simple, and then it updates them. It eliminates loops, although Salesforce has increased our loop allowance now. This just helps us not have to worry about it. So, but what it does is if it's in debug mode, it automatically shifts over here, and then we use filter by selected contact. And the ID, we have to filter out the context update, which is from that collection element using that long complex logic. And basically it's checking to see if there is a record, any record by the ID, by the contact ID that we passed in. And then for some reason, you can't filter by null in that filter collection. I think it's a bug, I'm not 100% sure, but it does not, if you run that filter collection variable, it does not calculate with a null value. It shows an empty value, but it won't calculate as null. But if you set this variable number found contacts variable to the count from the filter, it will set a 0 if none were found. Don't know. Then we just run a simple decision element here. Number contacts greater than 0, the contact was found. If the contacts were found, all it does here, this is just a do nothing. It just sets variable debug results, contact found with filter criteria. And if the debug results, contact not found by filter criteria. And as we saw when we run this flow, we can actually just hit debug. I'm not even going to roll back. And you can see, you can follow the path. You don't even need to read. It goes through contact was found. Okay, great. We want the contact found. Between this, using this debug flow, and all you need to do when you put this into production to make it active is you just got to make sure that You set the variable debug to a default value of false. Simple enough. Now, you could also get you could get even more complex here. You can't run a subflow from a schedule. You can run a subflow from a scheduled flow. So you could put a subflow in here to create 7 contacts that either fit the criteria or don't, and it could go through with the logic and it could test them, each of them, and test pass or fail. Truthfully, that's probably the best way to do this for permanent testing. But until Salesforce gives us a way to say run all tests on flows, not as useful. This is more in the developing, and this is more if they want changes to that logic. I can put it in, I can take a sample test contact, and I can test really quick and see if it hits the criteria. I hope this has been helpful, particularly this portion here of using just a page component, just a fields component. So you have quick access to the fields, makes the testing very easy to test several different logical components in the course you're developing, and then if you need to fix your formula. Well, like I said, I may go back and redo this someday with a subflow that actually creates contacts, run it in rollback mode. It creates the contacts, creates 8 contacts, some pass, some don't, checks for pass, checks for fail. If they don't, and then just rolls back so your created contacts weren't even created. But I think this method here, just adding the variables and just going through and seeing if the test one was found in here, helps us in debugging this flow. I hope this has been helpful, and take care. Have a great day.